Hello, everyone. This is JLove conference, and we're wrapping up today's discussion with. Hello, Jessica. Today's discussion with a wonderful panel about how the industry moves on from Java 8. And I will give the mic, my virtual mic, to Baruch, who is the moderator of this panel. Thank you.
Oli, thank you very much for having me, for having us, for having this panel. I think it's a great opportunity to talk about the elephant in the room. And right, so as you mentioned, Trisha gave a great keynote this morning about how great a life past Java 8 is, and I guess that's kind of part of the effort, but the industry doesn't really budge. We looked at the developer ecosystem report from JetBrains. It was out a couple of months ago, and we can clearly see that 75% of the respondents told them, JetBrains, that their main application runs on Java 8. 75%. You know when Java 8 was released? Who knows? Who knows when Java 8 was released?
14.
Okay, people is going to Google. Okay, 14, yep. Right? So that's, we're 6 years now. And since then, we had the release of Java 9, Java 10, Java 11, Java 12, Java 13, Java 14, Java 15, 7 new versions. Every 3 of the 4 applications in the world run on Java 8. And you might say, well, it's just the reporting, it's not very actual. But if you look at Ben Evans' blog on New Relic, Ben Evans' post on New Relic blog post with the info from runtime environments that they monitor, it's even worse. It's more than 80% if you take all the flavors of Java 8 combined. So yes, no, the industry is still stuck on Java 8, although we're talking about the great features in Java 15. And the real question is why? I asked it on Twitter. We have a couple of answers. It would be interesting to see what your answers are. So let's start with why. Why people are not upgrading past 8?
Because it works. Their application works, and a lot of times with enterprise applications, it's just a little bit too daunting to even approach the migration. So if it works, why touch it is a lot of the responses that I hear.
What about 7? 7 worked as well. You know what? Yeah, Java 2 worked.
And people were on it until it was out of support.
Java 8 is out of support.
No, it is pretty much supported.
Well, that depends, right? Depends vendors. Depends on what do you pay to whom, right? I guess there are vendors that can support your Java 1.4 as well. So that's kind of, when you say out of support by whom?
Java OpenJDK 8 is pretty much maintained upstream, and there are lots of downstream vendors that contribute to that, and it's not the same thing as Java 7 or Java 6 or something.
But it is end of life, right?
End of life by whom?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
A lot of the dates that people throw around is 2030, because that's like the really dead, you can't have your application beyond that date. But I think part of it also is that people are not seeing a compelling reason to move. And that's why it's part of our responsibility to, show them all the good new features that are in there. And that's what Trisha's doing. That's what a lot of the people on the panel are doing, is saying there's a lot of great features on here. And once you move, you can take advantage of them. But we also need to help them move with the move itself, because the move itself is not as trivial as it was when you're moving from 6 to 7, 7 to 8, and then 8 beyond. It is more complicated to migrate.
So here is another reason, and this reason is the terrible, horrible Java 9.
It's not terrible.
Well, it holds an entire industry hostage. It is pretty terrible.
I think it's more that Java has decided it's going to be more strict about removing its deprecated APIs. And when you do something like that, that means more applications are going to break when you migrate. But it also means that you have less technical debt in your application. You're using less APIs that should not be used anymore in your application. So it is going to be a little bit more painful, but hopefully it will pay off once you move on. And some technologies take that route. Some technologies take the route of just let's keep it stable for as long as possible.
I just wanted to, before I forget, earlier you said that we've introduced 6 years worth of new JDK versions. I think it's even worse than that, because it's not just been 6 years of new versions beyond 8, right? We're nearly at 16. It's also that since then we have Java has become a very different landscape, right? I mean, GraalVM, native images, right, is now there. That's a thing. And then how many different OpenJDK distributions are there now that weren't there for some reason in Java 8, right? Just every vendor has now gotten into this game in the last 6 years. So it's not just that they've ignored the numbers beyond 8, it's that they've ignored all these other things as well, which just boggles the mind, right? The entire industry is ready to move on, except for the industry, you know?
I have the alternate, I think, view on this. I don't quite believe it's our job to push people to migrate, while it is our intent, I guess, to make them run on reasonably modern stacks. But I think by and large, our role as the people who work on the foundation of the ecosystem is to make sure the ecosystem works. If that means maintaining 8U on which most of the ecosystem runs, then let it be that. If we understand that industry is not ready to move to the head JDK 15, we are helping them to migrate to Java 11, which is also the consensus long-term support by many vendors. So you would not, in my experience, you would not get any reasonable feedback if you go to people and say, you are so silly for sticking on 8U and you should really migrate to JDK 15, because you would not hear any sympathy to that argument from the actual developer community. If you talk to the guys who are talking on the conferences, sure, they will tell you that JDK 15 is the best JDK ever and you should migrate all your productions to there. But if you talk with the real people who have other problems than having a JDK in their stack, they have application servers, libraries, they have lots of legacy software that runs on top of that. That argument does not get you very, very far.
But I want to.
Java is always another. Yeah, I just wanted to second that, because that's another kind of answer that I got on my question. Is Java 8 is for some people just feature complete. Java is done. It works. It does what it should do. The syntax with streams and all the additions of Java 8 became quite good, and there is nothing compelling in the further developments that can be compelled enough to justify the acceptance tests costs that it will take to migrate. Java 8 is good enough.
I think I've seen more people say that they're just nervous about 9. Like, going back to that, it really is, for some reason, it's scary. That I work on the Spring team. Spring works perfectly in 15, right? We support it, so
no, we saw the conversation on Twitter today. It does not. But okay.
Which Twitter? Which thread?
The one that you have tagged about some problems with Spring Cloud on Java 15.
Java 15. Spring Boot works on 15. It's supported. I'm not sure about Spring Cloud, but that'll come.
Yeah, Spring Cloud. I think it was Spring Cloud, but yeah, it's just conversation from this morning that I saw. Yeah, okay.
Anyway, like things like the XML lib deprecation, things like that, that's all been smoothed over. So if you're using Spring, that just works, right? You don't need to worry about it in your build. But the reason people are scared is because there was this weird 9.0 where so many things just kind of didn't work, and that's unusual for Java. Like I think you said, Java 8 is feature complete, but that said, so were every up until that point, every version before was also fine. Nobody had trouble moving forward. It's just we finally have a version of Java that was not as friendly as the other ones, right? And Java is notoriously good about that. Just that one. I mean, once in 25 years, we had a version with some rockiness, and people are like, "Oh, okay, that's enough. I quit. I'll just use Java 8 forever." I guess I don't know.
I think some of the reluctance is justified, mainly because some of the dependencies, speaking of dependencies, Josh, some of the dependencies work and some of the dependencies doesn't. And a lot of developers are like, why don't I just wait until everyone gets their things figured out? And then, but it's kind of a catch-22 because some of the libraries are waiting to have some feedback to figure out, okay, is it even worth the move or whatever it is? So like, for example, just today I was doing a tutorial on one of the app servers and it did not support Java 11. And I was really surprised by that. And I was thinking, well, if the app servers don't even, support that, or other libraries, I've run into other libraries where it just doesn't support Java 11. And a lot of it is justifiable because it is harder to get the compliance with Java 11 and later, whether it's modularity or whatever got introduced in there, it is more difficult, and we want to acknowledge that. But at the same time, I'm very optimistic because a lot of the libraries and a lot of the app servers have figured things out and figured out how to move faster. This is one of the good things about the release cycle, the new release cycle, is that we're learning how to move faster than we did before. Java used to move a lot slower. So people were used to not having continuous builds or whatever it is. And now that we have something faster, we're learning. It's growing pains, but I think it's really good for also the application developers to get their infrastructure set up for something more faster, more continuous, all the things that we keep preaching, but no one's really pushing us to do. And now there's a good, another good reason to do it.
I think you covered the one more reason that I heard a lot on as well on this Twitter thread is that although we believe that everything is now 6 years later is not 6, sorry, 3.5 years later after Java 9 is everything is past Java 9. That's not the case. There are a lot of libraries, maybe not the most popular ones, but maybe it's kind of an old and enterprisey type, which are still on Java 8 and won't move over anytime soon. And it means that all the people that depend on them directly or transitively just cannot move past Java 8.
Yeah, you've Dalia and also Josh made the point that this isn't a language shift. This is a culture shift. This is about, do you change your software, period? And how much does it cost to change your software? What I find scary isn't that they're on an old version of Java. It's that so many companies have built this software that they're afraid to change. And that's holding back all their business processes in whatever decade they built that.
Perfect. Well, absolutely perfect.
All right. Okay. So what do we do? And there are, I think I heard a couple of different approaches here. The first is we just keep maintaining Java 8 because customers knows best, and if they don't move, probably they don't need to. And our job is to make sure that industry is comfortable on Java 8. And the other is
you're reciting my position. I have to rectify that. My position is that maintain what customers want. Yes. Right now they want 8U because that's what runs their stable stacks. And I think the major migration point from 8U is 11U. So your job is kind of twofold. You maintain 8U so it's still a stable and reliable base for the existing stacks, and you maintain 11U so that all the migration kinks that JDK had accrued through 9, 10, and then 11, and all the regressions that are there and all the interesting API changes are covered or published or have workarounds and something like that. So, slow and steady, I would say.
Okay. Other ideas of what we should do? Is it like reasonable just to leave people alone and let them do them?
I sort of wonder what would happen if we just reminded people really loudly that they don't need to use modules. And then suddenly 90% of the fear goes away. There's still some issues, but it's really an exclusion here, except for JavaFX. That's going to be a nightmare. If you're using JavaFX, that's a whole day of fun, but maybe half a day. But either way, most things will just be okay. That's what we found. The XML libraries, things like that, you'll fix that. There's well-known, well-understood pain points. People are doing it. It's the modules cloud that makes
but I think that the fear is not I'm going to need to move to use modules, is dependencies that I use, especially the transitive ones that I don't even know about, probably use modules. And this is what is going to break everything, because modules are contagious. Once some library uses modules, now everything has to use modules and I'm doomed.
I think industry by and large moved from that idea that if you want to use Java 11, you have to use modules. I mean, most of the migrations that I've seen and helped with are basically compiled with target 9 and run on JDK 11. That's the usual recipe there. So I think people are the initial shock of the module is already kind of wearing off. Yes, it would help to remind people that you can still upgrade your JDK without upgrading your language level or something like this. Or even if you upgrade your language level, you don't have to use the language features that are shipping with that at that target or JDK target. Yeah, but yeah. The thing is that the runtime itself, we kind of do this interesting dance. We tell people that the runtime is substantially better in JDK 11, and we tell that to people as the reason to migrate. But you have to appreciate the flip side of that argument, is that if you have changed a lot in the runtime, does that mean there are bugs that you will see during that migration in runtime itself? You cannot kind of claim that all of the changes that you did in that time frame are good and perfect and bug-free. You cannot. So I guess what we can do is what we are doing basically, is we're listening intently to what people are doing in their 8 to 11 migration and help on 11U side if they have some blocker issues for migration there. That's about it. I mean, LTSs are the cornerstones of the ecosystem here. So 8U is current LTS, current old, right? In the Debian nomenclature, it's like old stable, right? In 11U is like old stable, and the STS is stable. So migrating from the old stable to old stable is where I see a lot of those silent majority stacks are at this point. So this is where we should help them. I don't think they have to keep being reminded about all the glorious things that await them after they migrate. They kind of know that stuff. What they have problems with is dealing with regressions, if any, that they see while migrating. If they run into enough of them, they will just say, no, where we are is good enough, and that's it. We have businesses to run. We are not here to upgrade JDKs for exposing ourselves to more risk. That's the sad thing to hear if you are a JDK vendor, but it's the reality nevertheless.
But I think the path here is pretty clear, and that's awareness in terms of documentation, tutorials, consulting, and everything else. If you all are convinced that there is nothing that shouldn't be anything too traumatic to migrating from the old to the old, from 8 to 11, how do we make sure that the industry knows that? Because when we look at the numbers, apparently the industry doesn't. Apparently most of the industry is still afraid of what is going to happen, and whatever is out there is not enough to convince that will be a smooth sailing.
Is it really true? I mean, is JDK11 adoption is really that slower than the adoption of like the old major releases? I don't have that feeling, actually. Maybe it is a bit slower, but not substantially so. So you wouldn't expect the people jump to the new major release within half a year or within a year or within 2 years. So having
why do we bother with the 6-month releases there if you don't expect people to adapt it?
That's a good question.
So there's always a variety of people that you're talking to. You have the folks that are, running enterprise applications. They have certain needs where they need to be on something that is kind of more, LTS, all that good stuff. But there are people on the other side that like to take advantage of the latest features. They like to experiment. They like to do all that stuff. And as when you're talking to the two developers, they have different motivations. And a lot of the developers, I like to speak differently to the different people. So if I'm saying, oh, look, all of these new great features that you're going to start taking advantage of once you move, that's the developer that gets excited about that. On the other side, I have developers that I really care about security. So I tell them, look, there is TLS 1.3. You've got to move to Java 11 in order to take advantage of that. Security. And then on the other hand, there's people that just want their application to run and not worry about the infrastructure or whatever it is. And a lot of times I tell them, just worry about Java 11 and then Java 17. Don't worry about the intermediate. So it's like different people have different requirements. And I think it would be good to not, focus on one method or not the other. It's great that everyone has a variety of ways to convince folks to move on. And we just need to talk about it. I love the fact that I see those comments on Twitter of developers moving and saying, I moved and I had a problem with this, but here's how I fixed it. So, and you just keep hearing that more and more. And the more you hear it, whether it's out in the community or on Twitter or wherever you're at, the more encouragement you feel and more confident you feel in moving. But the more that we say like, oh, no, you shouldn't be on Java 8 anymore or whatever, like, why are you on Java 8? We know why they're still on Java 8. The fact that some of the libraries haven't moved yet means that there is some kind of difficulty there, and we need to solve that problem. Because if it's easier and there are more tooling and all that stuff, people are going to be more likely to move, and they're going to tell their friend, it wasn't that hard to just move on or whatever it is, and it's going to be more successful that way.
I've been using Java, whatever version is current, for years, and like I say, huge chunks of the ecosystem, Spring, Hibernate, these kinds of things, they work fine. They really do. We've long since had the toothing pains and all that, so the huge swaths of the ecosystem are already there. I think there are. You're right, absolutely. There are some libraries that are some app servers. We mentioned that there's that possibility, but when it comes to the libraries, I think. The big ones, Android doesn't count, right? Because that's not going to be up to the current version anyway.
And it's not Java anyway.
Well, yeah, so that doesn't count, right? But if you look at like on the server side, there's really not a lot of use cases where it doesn't work. And when it comes to the libraries, like logging and building apps and software, all the database access, all that stuff works just fine. So my question then is, since that is already true, what is the feature that we need to like? Because for me, it's clear as can be. You need to be on the latest versions to get the optimizations for containers, right? How do you make that move? it's clear to me that Project Loom is going to be a huge win as well. There's these really, it's not just technical debt that we're trying to stave off, it's paradigm changing new features, right? Things that make Java much more relevant. And it's very scary to me that people aren't embracing those huge wins, right? That means either they don't care enough about it, which means that we haven't done a good enough job elucidating the use case or the opportunity, or worse, they just have no interest. They're going somewhere else, right? What if they're not going to Java? What are they going to, right? And I gotta believe they're going to go to Java. So I think they're scared. I think there's something where they're not understanding. It's because otherwise it's just clear. It just seems very obvious that you want to get rid of technical debt, and like Jesse said, you want to be in a position where you can upgrade, where you can move in an agile fashion, right? If you're not willing to do that, that's a big problem.
Or we misunderstand that they want to upgrade, or their values actually include the obsession with updates. It is interesting. I mean, for the JVM developers, of course, I would like people to adopt newer JDKs, but I also realize that people does not necessarily share the same value set that I am. And again, when you talk to the people who are stuck on, well, and I'm doing this facetiously, stuck, not stuck, who are running on 8U, most of the time they are just comfortable there. Most of the time they say, we tried to migrate. We could not because of this or that or that thing. And we're waiting a few months until that bugs that we have reported are fixed, so we can make this jump. But that's about it. They are not, the people who are, how should I put it? I don't think that people require convincing to upgrade. Those who want to upgrade know they have to upgrade. Those who can't upgrade, you can tell them that their software processors suck and they should not be really allowed to develop because if your software is not upgraded, you're not a real developer or something, some stuff like that. But
as a consumer, what scares me is if your software is not upgraded, it is insecure. The world changes around it, and your software needs to change.
Right, but this is orthogonal, and security work that is done in 8U and 11U because those are long-term support releases. So security is kind of orthogonal to this thing.
Yeah, you update security, you get the security patches, you just don't update your base version. It's another concern. But
yeah, in fact, if you try to do compliance, because if you want to do security stuff, and you will find yourself in the discussions about compliance. Recertifying your stack on the newer major JDK, it would be an interesting experience for you, I guess.
Yeah, that's valid. But I would say that, it's not black and white. It's not like, hey, there are some people that are, that 75% of the industry are completely fine with what 8 provide them and don't find anything appealing at all in any of the further versions or the features that they bring. I'm doubtful about that. On the other side, we see obviously that the majority of the industry is not tempted to update to 15 or whatever it is because they would put more effort into it and we would see a different percentage. I think it's somewhere in the middle. It's a mix of it's not worth the effort because we don't know about what's good is there. So actually talking about the new features is not, as you put it, convincing people to upgrade. It's just like, hey, you have to upgrade because new is good and shiny, but hey, there are features that can make up for the hassle of upgrade because it makes you more productive. Because you get better performance or both. Yes. Do you convince that as the convincing that we shouldn't do?
Yeah, maybe my customer base is really skewed in this regard because I did this spiel all the time, and then I realized it's redundant because people are actually understanding that stuff. Because when I do this spiel, the next thing they say to me is that, yes, we know we're willing to upgrade, but we can't right now because of the reason A, B, and C. That's it. So I'm kind of at best sound condescending to these guys. So
there's several theories of the case. One is, I mean, we just identified several things that are causing people to stay, right? I think we've established that. Is it just that we have to fix everything before any one person will make the move, or I mean, what's the path forward? If talking about it doesn't solve it for your customer base, it has for people I talk to. But then again, like was just said earlier, a lot of us are in conferences. That's the Ivy Tower ecosystem where everything is unicorns and happiness, right? Like that's not necessarily real. I also work a lot with customers, but we're on the cloud. In the cloud, it's very natural for us to conveyor belt people to the new versions. You just have this upward pressure, and Spring makes it easy as well because it works very nicely with all these versions. So we're able to say, hey, your apps are going to work. We've already certified that. And by the way, your cloud platform's already updated accordingly, right? So what's the rest of the world? What's the argument we need to make to get them to, do you think Java, actually 17, I think Loom, do you think people will say, okay, this is a huge, almost double the number of versions, basically, it is double the number of versions in a few months. And then at what point does it become ridiculous? Like, when do people just go, okay, yeah, we've got to move, not because it's going to buy us anything, but just because we don't want to be that far behind. I don't want to use COBOL or PHP 2, or something like that. Jesse, are you muted?
I mean, it's not an unreasonable comparison. Apps continue to run on COBOL now. They can continue to run on Java 8. I mean, and as Alexey pointed out, as long as there's security upgrades and they're applying those, and as long as you pay enough, these companies have to pay hopefully increasing amounts for the continuing support of Java 8. Fair. But then you start bifurcating Java developers into COBOL/Java 8 developers and progressing forward Java 16, 17, etc.
Android already did that. We've already got those who can move and those who can't. I'd hate to have the Java side of the ecosystem doing it to itself, It's one thing if
does it give Java a stodgy old name? Yes.
Yeah.
What do you do?
And Kotlin and other languages that can compile back to these older versions don't help the situation either.
So I'm going to go back to one of the questions I got during one of my talks on Java 8. Someone stood up and asked me, how do I convince my management that I need to move? And it really does boil down to how do you justify it from a resource perspective when you have, a large backlog, and Alexey's like, just when you have a large backlog, and we know all this, of things that you have to do, and the least of the problems that you want to go to your manager with is a supported version that's still they can stay on and you're just fine. Why would they move, or how would they convince their managers to move? And I think that's a good question to ask. And it comes down to all the different reasons we've already talked about. And part of that is getting the developer excited about the new features. But if they go to their manager and say, I'm really excited about these developer features, they're going to be like, okay, what? So what? Like, what are you saving me? Now that's where a lot of the performance or security or all of those stuff come in.
Containers.
But go ahead, Josh.
Containers, that's a huge reason to get current.
Yes. And all those things are important. But it takes time, it takes resources. And I think the easier we make it to migrate, I think that would help a lot. And a lot of the work that is being done by different people, whether it's just documentation, like I have this, one of the top Stack Overflow questions is the JAX-B not being there anymore, and someone just saying, just add it to your dependencies and you're going to be fine, or things like that, where we just want to keep talking about it. People that run into the issues, keep asking those questions. My former team worked on a tool that would help with that. Like anything the community can do to make the migration easier is definitely going to be a big plus, because if it is just a click of a button, people will do it. It's just that a lot of times it can be a click of a button and sometimes it can't, and people don't like that "it depends" answer. So we just keep talking about it. We keep documenting the issues. We keep encouraging each other to be open about the issues we're running into, so that we don't just run into one problem and give up, but we just keep talking about, all right, this library is missing the support. What's going on there? When is it coming? All those things, and helping the library developers to move on. Like, why are they behind? What's the problem there? And how can we bring everyone along, not just leave people behind? I think that's the biggest thing, is let's keep bringing people along instead of leaving people behind.
How do we make it so that there's a sense of pressure for the vendors themselves to not just support the new stuff, but also not support the old stuff, right? At some point, there's got to be an upward pressure. The .NET community did a very good job of shaming VB programmers into using C#, for example, right? You could technically use it, but the very clear momentum was towards this new thing called C#. And that nowadays, most of .NET is not this multi-language ecosystem like we were promised. It's C#, right? How do we get people there to the new version? How do we? Every presentation I've done, I always remind people that they should be using the current version of Java, and it's not just technically the better version, it's also morally the better version, because they're not going to want to see the looks on their children's faces when they find out that their parents are using Java 8 in production. It'll ruin them. It'll destroy them. Their little faces will crumple. Do it not just for the technical reasons, do it for the children. And I don't know how to make it more clear that it's ridiculous. It's not just like...
Just make it expensive. Alexey, can we make it expensive?
Yeah, tax it like a luxury vice.
Expensive with time. Yeah, naturally it would. Not probably in the pace that you want to get everyone on Java 11 today, but yeah. But see, the example of Dalia is basically one of the things that I learned in this job, is that developers consistently overestimate the power they have in choosing the software they run. And that's unfortunate, because if you go on the conference and tell to developers that they should to upgrade, you're preaching to the choir there. It's not something that, it's not the audience that you have to convince. It's developers that want more productivity or more features or something, have to go back and convince businesses. And in the end, if you want adoption, you have to convince businesses. And businesses are not thinking about, well, they are partially thinking about what are the benefits that the upgrade will bring, but they mostly think about risks. And that's the thing that you should be taking care of. And it would not help if I go on the stage and say that I have migrated my stack from 8 to 11 and everything just worked. So Java 11 migration is very easy, because the moment those people run into the actual problem during this migration, they will feel alienated by this, because they would say, we must be doing something really terribly wrong, because all these glorious people on the conferences told us the migration is a breeze of fresh air. You just migrate and everything works. I think a little more honesty here would be beneficial. I think should say that this migration is the migration between major JDKs. It will come with some regressions. It will come with some inconsistencies that are non-bug differences, as we would like to tell them. And we should be asking them, what are they? What are the problems they're running into? What are the risks they're trying to mitigate with this migration? And how can we help in mitigating those risks? This is how you get all the sorts of feedback from the customers that will help them to migrate from 8U to 11U, and will help them to convince their managers to say that this is the plan. This is the features that are obviously good to get. And these are the risks that are not obvious, that we quantified, that we tried. And these are the workarounds or the fixes in the pipeline that we're gonna get going forward. So it's kind of this kind of balancing act that you have to do. This is why I'm kind of, I'm reluctant to get behind all this stuff about migrate to the freshest JDK and everything is gonna be fine, because I know it's not gonna be. There would be problems. Our job, I think, is to be the helping hand in resolving those problems, and it starts with admitting that there would be problems.
What can we talk about that? Actually, I know about, for example, the JAXP libraries. That's an issue. If you do, but again, a framework like Spring it's gone. You don't worry about it. I know about JavaFX not being there, but again, is that the majority of the ecosystem? Probably not, right? What other issues are we facing out there in the wilds?
VM and JDK bugs.
Yep, and missing APIs too, like things that. Oh, go ahead, Josh.
Like unsafe.
Unsafe is still there. No, it's mostly, let me just see. Java 9 came with 16,000 of changes. Some of them are regressions. So I'm still kind of in this weird business of fixing the regressions that were accrued since 8, fixing them in def and backporting them back to 15 right now in 11U. So there are plenty of things that customers routinely blow themselves up on. It's not, API is kind of an easy thing here. It's either works or it doesn't. It either does what you want or it doesn't. You can capture it in the unit test, or it's written right there in JavaDoc. The more subtle bugs, it's like you deploy your application and it starts to behaving not the way it behaved on the previous major Java release. Yeah, good luck debugging that.
So I do want to add to that, because getting a class not found exception is also pretty scary when you're moving, because when you did it in the previous migrations, like a class not found is not something to expect. So I don't want to minimize the fact that there are APIs that are missing, but we're doing more and more to point out, okay, here's the replacement. We're going to make it as easy as possible for you to replace all the things that are missing, whether it's the Java EE APIs that impact a lot of developers, or the APIs like base64 encoder and decoder, or like there's a lot of things that moved or got removed, or things that we haven't seen in previous migrations. And we do want to admit that it is difficult from that perspective. Now you get to the even more complex bugs and it gets even scarier. I've seen things where the performance has been a little bit worse. There is some stuff that is just not great, but the more people are reporting it, the more things are getting either documented so folks can find the solutions easy, or they're getting fixed in a more recent release, because before you had to wait a very long time. And with Java 15 or 16, even if you're just running testing on that, that's really helpful. Having an early access of the Java version, just so that you test and make sure, did that bug get fixed already? Or am I running into something that has not been fixed already? So I want us to be a little bit, I think it's important to be hopeful a little bit more, just because yes, it's difficult, but it's not as difficult as sometimes we make it sound, because people are going to be like, oh man, I don't want to attempt this. No, people have attempted it. Some people have got it running right away too. Like that's one thing that I want to point out. Some people have migrated to Java 11 and their apps just worked. And they're like, what are you talking about? I didn't have any issues. But some people have not. And we're helping both people out. And no matter who you are in the environment and what application you have, there's people like us that want to help you and will try our best to move you forward.
I have a stupid question here, friends. Forgive me if this has been done. Is there some website where all of us can point people to say, hey, here's the recipe, here's a list of things, if you get this, do this. If you get this, do that, right? It's just like all of us as vendors could say, look, this is well-tread territory. It's a well-beaten path. Here's a list of all the things we've seen people do. And each time any of us experiences anything, we can go to this canonical website and add a little tip saying, when you experience this, that's what this is, right? So that now people feel comfortable, or are we just leaving it to Stack Overflow? And if so, can we also build a website that if it doesn't exist, let's build it and not get sued by using the word Java?
That's a great question. There's always the migration guide that Oracle brings out that documents all the major changes that went in. And that's a good form, but there's also things that are subtle that is not documented, and that's where there's those gotchas. So a Google search would be good, but it would be good to have a centralized place for all these things. I don't know, someone out there can definitely attempt to do it and centralize some of these resources for people. I like that idea.
We can get the Java champions and all of us, and everybody can. I bet there's something out there. Surely we're not the first to have thought of this. Just wondering.
Alexey is smiling like.
Vendors have their own knowledge bases about this stuff.
Speaking about vendors and multiple vendors, there's one more thing that I wanted to throw kind of into the pot and see if we can take this apart is obviously the licensing issue, right? And that was another reason that I heard from people who are reluctant to upgrade from Java 8. Now I cannot use the kind of the official Java from Oracle. And I don't want to use any of the open JDK builds because first of all, now I need to do like a double migration. I need to migrate a version, but also I need to migrate to other vendor. Also, who are those people? I don't know them. I don't trust them. I'm not even sure they know what they are doing. I want the official one, but I definitely don't want to pay more or pay anything for this regard.
Licensing. No one wants to speak up. No,
I imagine that. This is kind of, I left it towards the end to see if anyone bites.
No, it's a fair point. That's why I think projects like Adopt OpenJDK or Adoptium or whatever the name is, things like that really give me hope that we're giving a solution to folks and it is becoming more popular. Go ahead, Alexey.
Yes, Java 9 was kind of, after Java 9 was kind of an interesting double punch for the ecosystem. But I think after the initial shock receded, most people suddenly realized that OpenJDK is not as bad as everyone made it sound before when Sun and Oracle proprietary binaries were available. Now they are not available. Suddenly OpenJDK releases are just as good. And you can get the build from the vendors that are not substantially different from what you got in the proprietary JDKs. And I mean, it was kind of learning, it was kind of the panicky learning episode in the Java ecosystem, but I think we passed that. I think most people can understand that OpenJDK is the solid. It's not even the alternative at this point, right? It's the JDK that you can run.
Yeah, but the question is, are there, as you said, it's a double blow, right? So you have the risk of migrating from one major version to another, from 8 to 11. And there is also a risk of replacing the vendor while you're doing so. And it actually means replacing, it's another version. OpenJDK is not exactly the same as what came from Oracle or still comes. And I have to do like 2 migrations at once, which increases the risks and obviously makes people even more reluctant of moving past 8.
Yeah, so, but you've got what you wanted. It's expensive to get proprietary JDKs. You wanted to make the old stuff expensive, right? That's what you got. You can
but the 8 you can go to the free from Oracle. It's the other way around. It's the most kind of what it looks like from the outside. The most official version of Java is out there is 8 from Oracle. I'm not moving to your hipsterish OpenJDK distributions that no one knows who write them and what they know about Java. I want to stay on the original official one, which is 8.
Yeah. What is the last 8-year release that you can get from Oracle for free?
You know better than me, that's for sure.
Yeah. Oracle maintains their own private repositories for 8U and 11U. They ship their own proprietary GDKs based on that. Yes, if the risk is unbearable, you can. There is always an option to go and pay Oracle for the supporting all these binaries that you are accustomed to run. This might be a good marketing move for companies that ship those binaries. But it is what, again, it is what you wanted. You wanted to have the financial pressure on the guys to migrate to the other newer stuff. That's how it looks when it comes to reality.
I do want to add that the migration for Java version is, yes, it's painful, but the vendor migration, I have not heard a lot of actual issues in the field because of that. Maybe some few issues, but it has been pretty similar to what you had gotten before. So people that have moved to, OpenJDK, they have not complained a lot about differences in behavior in that area. So, if that's a risk factor, it's a small risk factor. I'm a lot more concerned about the major Java version change than I am about the vendor change.
There are surprisingly interesting issues in this migration. You would be surprised how many libraries actually check for the vendor string.
Oh, really? I have not heard that. That's very interesting. And one of the things that you can run into is that the Java version convention changed from like 1.8 to 11. And some people were checking for that number. So we had to say, by the way, if you're checking the Java version, this is the new convention. But I mean, it's just, one or two or three things that hopefully if enough people run into it and there's enough Google hits that they can move forward from it. But the bigger issues, have been more with the major version change than the vendor, which it is a risk. It is unfortunate, but I don't think it's as big of a risk.
Yeah, and part of that is technical reasons because the upstream, because most vendors are basically building from the upstream OpenJDK, so they sometimes add features on top of that, hopefully not destabilizing JDK. But most of the time, even in the update releases, even if the vendors have downstream distributions of something, they feel more comfortable in upstreaming those features because they would share the maintenance costs that way without maintaining their downstream distributions, unless the things that you do downstream is really your cash cow, but it most often isn't. So yeah, most of the time things are shared, and this is why, for instance, I'm more or less trusting the JDK binaries that come in from the volunteers or from, say, Linux distributions that are not having lots of testing for their OpenJDK things, because the chance that you will screw something up while building from the known good source is present, but it's not that high. Yeah.
I just wanted
shared code is very good to have. Yeah,
I just wanted to volunteer that I was, forgive me, I was on the Twitters, and fellow Java champion Henri Tremblay made a great point, which is he suggests that people will migrate once the warnings about reflection go away. That's true. I've learned to just ignore those because they're not errors; they're warnings. They're meant to be.
That's not a good excuse for ignoring them. Sorry, Josh.
I mean, they don't cause any issues, right? It's anyway. Yeah, it only matters if you're doing modules.
Yeah, so that's exactly that, right? That's the point. I mean, we spoke about how important it is that we calm people down and tell them that everything will be fine, and then they try that, and their log explodes with warning that the severity of them you cannot understand without understanding very, very deeply what's going on with modules and everything. And he just says, you know what, disregard modules, it will work. And then this is what you have.
Let me back up to the vendor story, because I think it's a very positive thing in this, because there is non-small group of people in the industry who used to use the so-called golden binary from Sun and Oracle, and they are now feeling betrayed that that is not available. Whether their feelings are legitimate or not is the whole different discussion, but they feel that way nevertheless. So the multi-vendor thing that we see right now in 8U and 11U is the good thing for them, because they now say that if any other vendor would do the same for the binary that we will run, we can have the, we can sidestep to the other vendor without much of the problem. And that's a really, really good thing for the JDK ecosystem, I believe, because it provides you with the stability. You can say that you're not basically vendor locked to your JDK distributions. You can switch without much harm if your vendor starts misbehaving or not behaving the way you suppose it will behave 10 years from now. So
yeah, that's one way to look at it, but another is definitely what you mentioned before, right? There are a lot of people who want to be vendor locked as long as the vendor is the one who provides the golden binary that they can trust. It's a trust issue, right? I don't want to be able to choose between different vendors because I'm not sure why I should trust one of them or another, or even both of them. On the other side, if I know that Java comes from Oracle, this is who I want to put my trust in once and for all, and forget about needing to pick between vendors that I have no trust with.
Yes. Yes, you can. If you are willing to pay for it, yeah, sure, go for it.
Do we just need to? I was thinking, what are the only language that really? I think we're spoiled here in the Java ecosystem because, as somebody who uses other platforms and languages, I have no expectation of anything working more than a year anywhere. Like Node, more than a year, that's ridiculous. It's a joke. It's a sizable, laughable, ridiculous, obscene joke. PHP even, come on, we don't get this anywhere else. And so I just feel like, what do we have? Do we have to be meaner to people? Does the Java ecosystem have to be terrible to people just for a little bit to get them used to upgrading? I don't understand. No. Do we have to do what the other ecosystems do?
That's the opposite of what Alexey had said, being kind and actually maintain what people use.
This is the major asset in the Java ecosystem. This is why Java is the major player in the software industry. Shedding that as if it's it's the shackles that you have to lose to run faster is basically kneecapping yourself. This is the major advantage of the Java ecosystem as the whole. I'm very fond of the Brian Goetz's thought about this. He actually says that in his office there is the little plaque above his monitor which says, "Brian, don't break Java." And this is kind of your primary mandate here, and this is very, very important to understand, I think. And this is really hard to understand if you're just talking to the speakers at the conferences, which I was guilty of. Is that boring is good, surprisingly, for many people. So there is the significant amount of very vocal people that advocate for the drastic changes, but you also have to understand that the people that you, I would say really work for, are the people who want your foundational stuff to be unsurprising. Because they have other problems. They have the problems with their application stacks. They don't want your problems on top of below that. Sorry. So
definitely, I agree with that. And just to add really quick, I think the solution is we keep talking about the migrations and what kind of issues you might run into, how do you fix them, all those things. I will be posting a presentation I've done to just walk through what common scenarios you've run into and what kind of issues you're gonna run into and how do you fix them. I demo fixing an app. I'm gonna post that on Discord for people. I know we're getting at the end of the session, but I do want people to take away that, you know, we understand that it's gonna be more difficult than other migrations, but we're here to help you. We want to see you there. We want you to take advantage of those new features, and the easier the migration, the better, but we're also here if you run into issues.
Yeah, tell us where the problems are. I think we are pretty much on the same page with everyone that newer stuff is good to have. The only, I think, substantial discussion that you really need to have is that what doesn't work.
I wonder if right now, if you look at some polls, and I gather I have some. I take these with a grain of salt. I think we all should, but some surveys are already suggesting that Python and JavaScript have now there are more people using those than Java. So the critical thing that we talk about, our core momentum around this large user base, is dwindling. And so the question is, what do we need to do to make Java more compelling? If it's not worth upgrading, then what do we need to do? And those languages, JavaScript and Python, have changed in backwards incompatible ways in the 8 years since Java 8 came out, in big ways. So it's clearly possible to get large communities over the hill and down the corner. What do we need to do? I don't have a solution here.
It's an interesting philosophical question of whether you want to extend your user base at the expense of the values that you thought are your core values, like stability. This is the interesting debate to there.
I think we don't have to, right? This is the beauty of the JVM, that it allows for different philosophies coexist. And if you want to, you can refer to Java as the stable one and to Kotlin or whatever, name any other language on the JVM as the modern one, advanced one, the hipsterish one, or whatever. And you don't need to make Kotlin out of Java because there is Kotlin and it's fine. It's catered to different audiences, and it is a good thing.
Here's the another thing is that one of the reasons, I guess, to support LTSs is that when people run into the problems with LTSs, that means mostly means that they are sticking with LTSs because they cannot adopt the faster release cycle, which means if they run into the irreconcilable problems there, this is the point where they migrate from Java. Do I make it clear enough? So if the industry cannot migrate from ATO, this is why I'm saying that you have to help to migrate to people by listening to them and solving their problems, because the way you lose people is that they are having these ancient stocks that cannot migrate from ATU. Mm-hmm. And at that point, they are at the juncture whether they invest into the reinvigorating the Java stacks that they have and migrate it to 11U or 17U, which is not yet here, or they invest the same kind of money to rewrite all the stock into the other completely different.
Moving to Java 11 is in no way ever going to be as much work as rewriting the whole thing. It's not that bad. That's what I'm worried about, is that tautology of like these two things are the same. It's like saying, well, it's this enlightened, the /reddit.com are enlightened centrist or enlightened centrism. No, there's no way. It's just not that bad, right? Like, we need to make people understand, yeah, there's this issue here, there's that, but it's not the same as rewriting your app. So how do we get people to do that? If they think it is the same, then we've got a problem. We got to fix the marketing here.
Okay, maybe my perspective is again very skewed, because I've seen enterprise stacks that are heavily JVM specific. And so, yes, migrating them to major to another major JDK is the major challenge. And scrapping all of that and rewriting everything from scratch is sometimes a better option there. And at that point, you have to decide whether you rewrite this in Java or you rewrite it in something else. This is the juncture that they're facing.
I would say that Josh's point about in most situations, migrating is much cheaper. It's painful and it's not as exciting as learning a new language and doing everything from scratch. And you know how much we want to do that because it's like, you know, you get this new shiny thing. But on the other hand, if we make it as predictable and boring as possible, if we make it as predictable and boring of a migration as possible, it's going to help folks out there. So let's just strive towards that.
So I guess we're talking about, and we're coming back, circle back to that. We're talking about awareness. In the end of the day, I think most of us agree that in most of the cases, the migration is not as horrible as people expect it to be. The warnings are not really warnings. The missed libraries and dependencies are pretty easily solvable. The issue of the licensing really does not exist because you don't really have a choice to even stay with Oracle license, even for Java 8. So it's kind of, it's only a matter of, for free, it's only a matter of awareness in the end of the day. And it's up to us as the community to raise the awareness, not only by showing the latest shiny features, look how great this can be done in Java 15 or whatever, but actually doing the boring work of mapping those breaking changes, those thousands of breaking changes in some kind of useful database, approachable for everybody, so people will make educated assumptions on how their migration would look like, and then naturally will come to the conclusion that it's not as frightened as they thought it will be.
Yeah, as the guy who actually participates in supporting 11U, I'm gonna say that in many of these cases, the problems that you see there are solvable regressions. So you don't have to document that for posterity. You have to report it to OpenJDK 11U and get it fixed. We fixed like lots of these things in over the last few years of maintaining.
How many people know how to report an issue for a JDK? Where do I go? Do I go to Oracle? Do I go to my vendor? Is there like...
Yeah, you go to your vendor, of course.
I mean, I don't think it's as easy as reporting an issue against the latest shiny NPM library that Josh just brought, that you open an issue on GitHub, there is one maintainer, there is one name, I open an issue, it's fixed tomorrow because in 2 months this framework will be dead, so we'd better fix it before it dies. And it's straightforward. For Java, I don't think it's reporting an issue is as approachable as with other options.
You can go and open the issue for OpenJDK GitHub, which OpenJDK folks routinely forward to the appropriate channels in OpenJDK. You can show up in the, yeah, I know it's the old technology mailing lists, and just send the mail there if you don't want to work with your vendor. Or you can go to your friendly Java champion and say, this is the problem that I'm facing. What do I do now? If you are not willing to go with the vendor route. So it's, there is, it's not as straightforward because the ecosystem is very diverse, but your entry point is the people you got your distributions from, whether it's Linux distro you submitted to the Linux backtracker and see if they are Java team to deal with it appropriately. If that's a vendor, you go through their support channels. If not, you are going through the public channels like OpenJDK, et cetera, et cetera.
I just wanted to say, as somebody who's been creating bugs in software for 20 years, I don't think I've ever had to ask, was this bug in the JDK itself? I know, Alexey, all you see is that, but really, it's really good. If an idiot like me can get software into production on Java, then it can be done, right? Like, I don't even know, I don't know how to ask. I don't know how to file an issue. To Baruch's point, I have no idea. It's just never needed to be.
A lot of JVM bugs get unreported because of that belief. So people are just chasing the bugs in their applications or assume that they did something wrong, while it is actually the bug in JVM that can be fixed to the benefit of everyone. So, but it comes with an interesting discussion about who is doing the gory job of reading through the bug reports.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you work, I think if you look at the submission queue for the Oracle JDK, the java.sun.com, which HSR invites you to submit the bug to in most open JDKs by default, I'm willing to bet that 99% of those reports are my Minecraft is crashing with this segfault in the graphic library. So you need resources to get this, churn out. And I'm going to say a rather unpopular thing here, which will get me hated. But the hysteresis or resistance with this bug submitting process in some sense filters out low quality bug reports.
Yep. No, that's very valid, and that's another thing that we are telling people go and fill bug reports. So one of them is, do they know what to report, how to report, and where to report? But the other is really, is there any is there any hope that anyone will ever see that and fix that and everything else?
Yeah. If you're going open source, it's kind of you are doing the community resourcing kind of stuff. It's an open question. Who in community has time to deal with these bugs? If you want to guarantee stuff, you have to have relationship with your vendor.
Yeah. So I think we kind of can summarize that, and correct me if I'm wrong. And that's very, I will try to summarize what we spoke about for more than an hour now in 2 sentences. And I would say that upgrading is not as scary as it looks like, and we need to solve the visibility problem. And that goes into documentation and everything else that we spoke about. The second is maybe update is not for everybody, or at least the pace is not for everybody. We need to be aware of that, and the value of stability for Java is important, and we need to realize that. And maybe the pace that people upgrade is not as horrible as it looks like. There is nothing wrong with being on Java 8 only 3.5 years after the next one was released, or something like that, right?
Yeah, just tell us why.
Yeah. Just tell. Yeah, exactly. And the third one is work with us. Let's open this communication channel. Let's talk about why, and maybe we will leave you alone and we'll tell you, well, that's great, it works for you, don't touch it, or maybe it will help you and others to migrate faster. How about that? Does it kind of summarize it all?
Yes.
Yeah.
Josh, how's your poll is doing? So Josh, while we worked here, he was hanging out on Twitter, because this is Josh, and he pulled out a poll asking about the Java versions, obviously. Now, I mentioned that this is a very chambered audience that he has here, because it's a poll of his followers, and he just admitted that he constantly preaches to push to the latest version, but still interesting how it works. Even for your audience, Josh, what are we seeing? You're on mute. You're still on mute. Still on mute.
Sorry, slightly more. It's 48 and 6.8 using Java 9 plus of some flavor, OpenJDK or Oracle. 45 using Java 8.
And that's your audience. Even in your audience, there's 45% still using Java 8.
My audience is the enterprise, and that's still better than what the picture we painted earlier was. It's mostly people using Java 8, half.
Yeah, 75%. Yeah, no, but that's like including Alexey's audience, and I guess his numbers will be completely different from yours.
Yeah, I mean, again, the adoption curve for 11 is not as bad as you might imagine. It's not as good as you might want, but it's not as bad as you'd imagine. So,
yeah, I think that's one of the takeaways. Oli, take us away.
Yes. So thank you so much for this discussion. It was brilliant. And I have to say, I was staying here with my headphones on, and it was a pleasure to listen to your different opinions, and everyone contributed into conversation. So thank you so much.